Gonna give it a second to let people get on. Today we had McEwen. A second to let people get on. Today we had EJ McEwen cross-examination. He's the gentleman that brought in the aerial footage. He also testified that he saw people prone on the bridge. When I get in, we're right to jury questions. Jury question number 30. You testified you saw an individual prone and crouch in the crouched position. Did you message that to the ground and have people look into it? He said no, he did not see it at the time he was taking the video, which is what he testified to in the room. Number 31. Why did you not have a relief aircraft for when you went and fueled up? Because his recording stops midway, then they went to refuel, and then they come back. He said the leadership above advised that only one aircraft was needed, and he was told to deploy when he was told to deploy. The second part of 31, is it known if the defendants were on the ground in the wash or they were just on the bridges? He could not determine that. If on the bridge, could the BLM see them from their position? He couldn't, the judge wouldn't let him answer that either. He couldn't answer that. Tanasi gets back up for recross. When did you find out that they were in the crouching and prone position? He testifies that when reviewing the tape for this trial is when he found out, and it's for this trial, not the previous trial, for this trial, when he found out that they were in the crouching and prone position. Who was at that meeting? Well, the prosecution, there was many people, I don't know exactly. Was the FBI there? Yes. Then we bring in Alex Ellis. He is the gentleman that testified Wednesday and then was not here Thursday so that we could cross-examine him. Before he gets up, Tanasi gets up and puts a motion in for circumstantial evidence. He said the government opened the door. They asked Alex Ellis what he thought the mood of the crowd was at the first rally on the 12th, and he says that opens them up to ask other questions about the state of mind. The judge says to him, you do not have any case, he cited some case law, you do not have any case that says the defense should rely on circumstantial evidence because they cannot call a defendant to testify. They're saying the prosecution can do this because they cannot force a defendant to testify. The defense cannot do this because they have to get on and open themselves to cross-examination to get that information in. This went on for some time with Myrie getting up and saying things like, well, just because we asked that question once does not open the door for anything unlimited. So that went on for some time. Let's see, at the very end, the judge just says, well, Tanasi gets up and says, it was not the mood of the crowd that was assessed, it was the mood of the crowd that was obsessed. So it opens the door. Myrie says it doesn't open the door to everything. The judge says, I've made my ruling and pull in the jury. So she is done hearing from them. Then we get to Alex Ellis's cross. Right then, the judge brings up another jury question that they asked if they didn't understand a word, could they Google it and look it up? And she said, no, you have to write it on a jury question and ask them. Then we go to Tanasi. So you were up on the northbound bridge, then you go down into the wash from the northbound bridge. A lot of back and forth about where his position was versus when Flynn was actually recording, because him and Flynn were in different positions at that time. He was asked, he pulled up a picture and asked about a Nevada Highway Patrol truck. There was an objection. This witness can't identify trucks. There's an objection where, are you just trying to identify what's in the video? Are you asking him what he's seen when he was there? Of course, he answers our great answer, I do not recall seeing that. Prior to his testimony last week, he met with 3 times with the U.S. Attorney's Office and twice with the FBI. And that's just prior to this testimony. Marchese went up there, and he said on the 12th he went to Bunkerville. In your video, you identified Eric Parker. You said you saw him previously at the stage. And you said he had a weapon, but later you go in and they show you the pictures and he didn't actually have a weapon. He was unarmed. What made him stick out? Ellis says he was wearing a chest rig with magazines. He was then asked, well, others were wearing chest rigs. Yes, but others were dressed in camo, and you could tell that they were part of a group, and this gentleman was alone. So that's what made him stand out. He was asked about when the sheriff spoke about the BLM ceasing operations, Gold Butte being reopened, if he knew where Gold Butte was, which he didn't. He said lots of people were there. Did you see Eric Parker when you got to the parking spot? He said no. Most people were going to the northbound bridge. He asked, oh, you joined those people going to the northbound bridge. Were they walking or running? It was kind of a mixture. He was asked about when he went down into the wash, if he had his back to the bridge at times and back to the southbound bridge at times. That was yes. The judge then interrupts, when you and Flynn are separated, are you watching Flynn? She's covering her butt here. That question is purely to cover her butt because he should not be allowed to bring in the video if he is not with Flynn 100% of the time. So right here, she's trying to, they were getting those questions, well, are you with Flynn now? Are you not with Flynn now? Really getting it across to the jury that he wasn't with him 100% of the time, and this isn't what he's actually seeing. So the judge goes in and puts that question in just to make sure that she covers her butt. Leventhal then, you drove with Ellis in his car with Utah plates. Why did you go? There was an objection. He says, well, this goes to show bias. There was a sidebar, and of course that was sustained. He brings up the videos, points out long cameras. He says, did you see Mr. Drexler when you were at the rally? Ellis then says, yes, he did. He could tell because he was wearing a chest plate with magazines, circles Eric. Then the questions, like, obviously it's getting to the point where they're realizing that he didn't circle the right person. And he's like, oh, sorry, I got that confused. So he takes Eric off, and he circles Stephen Stewart. And he identifies him as Drexler. Then the judge says, well, do you know this person by first name? Once again, she's trying to cover the basis here for the prosecution. He says no. There was an objection. They're not using Ellis to identify people. Leventhal, so when did you come to know the names of these people? And he said after he visited with the government. Okay. Let's see what else. Lots of going about through the videos, identifying people with cameras, identifying flags, identifying everything except for guns, and lots of camo. Then they brought in parts of the video where you see the BLM. He was asking things like, did you see these men from the northbound bridge? Yes, he did. Did you see him pointing weapons? He said no, he could not make it from where he was seeing. He was asked if the videos were in sequential order. Then he was asked, in this video, Mr. Flynn asked you to take a note, asking you to see if you can figure out what the BLM were saying. He states they were on a megaphone and it was hard to hear them because the crowd was being loud, and then it was brought out that the megaphone wasn't clear. Then we go into the jury questions. One of the jury questions, when you heard about the rally, did you go just to see it or to participate? And why did you record it? He said he went with Flynn and they recorded it because they were reporting on it. The next question, you were 17 at the time. Was this your first time in a crowd this large and with people with weapons? He said no, he had been to the shooting range before and things like that, but this was different. Another jury question. In Government's Exhibit 11, you can hear Flynn saying, hit the ground if they start firing. What was your feeling at the time? He said yes, he was in fear that either side would start firing, so I thought that was good to at least get that in. And then the last jury question was, please label the bridges, southbound versus northbound, when there's only one in the picture, so they can identify what exactly they're looking at. What we have here is the jury is starting to see that there is stuff being hidden. He tried to identify Drexler at first as Eric Parker, then as Stephen Stewart. They are seeing that the witnesses are being told things by the government. Twice today, the aerial footage guy testified that he saw something when he did not know it was there until the government and the prosecution brought it up to him before he was to testify in court upstairs. Then we have Alex Ellis, who tries to identify people. The government's trying to get, pointing people out on the screen and telling him who it is, and he's supposed to testify to that in court. This is not a fair trial. This is complete railroading. What they're doing inside is crazy. Thank goodness that there's jury questions and some of this can be brought to light, because Obviously, after what we've heard today, both of these witnesses had met with the U.S. Attorney's Office and had met with the FBI more than twice each group to show them what they needed to testify on. If you have to be shown what you need to testify on, that is not your testimony. We are going back in with a new witness, and we will have an end-of-day update. Thank you all. I do want to mention a couple other things. We've got some new people here. Sherry Duvall from Readout News is in the courtroom today. Thank you, Sherry, for coming. We also have a gentleman from, is it South Dakota? Yep. He traveled a long way to be here today, so we appreciate that. We appreciate everyone who
Okay, I'll wait a second. Okay. We'll give it a few minutes to let people get on. First thing I want to say, the support down here at the courthouse today has been amazing. The American Warrior Revolution, they have been amazing bringing people down here, getting the word out. We have lots of supporters that have come all over our nation, coming here to see the injustice inside this courtroom. We have had a lot of people upstairs. The courtroom was full, and that makes a big difference to our guys, how they feel their support is, and how the judge even acts inside the courtroom. Although we found today that it doesn't matter how many people are in there, she's going to do what she wants to do regardless.
Almost ready.
We're going to give it a few more minutes to get some more people on here. Like I said, we appreciate all the amazing support. Bear with me. I usually have John here with me. And
we miss you, John.
We do miss you, John. Hope everything is okay and you're doing well. But I will do my best. Once again, we are down here in Las Vegas, Nevada. We are in day one of the actual trial, not including jury selection. We are starting with opening statements, and after lunch, they brought in, what is his name? Sheriff Lombardo. All right, you ready? No, not yet.
It's freezing up.
It's free. It was doing that too.
Yeah. They know to go to you though.
So after we got back from lunch, another defendant decided that they needed to do their opening statement as well because we are still having issues getting our stuff in. So we're beginning with Leventhal's opening statement. Can you hear me? Can somebody tell me they can hear me all right? Okay, so Leventhal says, what I want you to tell you is there are no Bundys in this case, even though this is not a Bundy trial. There are three parts to the so-called Bundy case. One is the Bundys, two is the militia, and what we have here is these guys. You will hear about the Bundys in court orders. Not one of these guys know about it. Not one of these guys were here in 2014 was in a militia. They will show an email from Ryan Payne. They show the email. It goes, they circle that it goes to over 300 people. But none of those people were Eric Parker, Stephen Stewart, or Scott Drexler. He tells the jury to look hard at the evidence and to make sure that it links them to the defendants and the defendants alone. Because they like to put a lot of this evidence in and say, oh, Ryan Payne said this, and they definitely saw it. But they have no proof that these people saw it, and it doesn't go to them directly. So he said, please, jury, look at the evidence and look at it hard to make sure that it is actually linked to these defendants, that it is actually something that these defendants saw. Because I can tell you that Eric Parker, Stephen Stewart, and Scott Drexler did not know of Ryan Payne or of MOA. He said there's backstory. Drexler saw videos and images that made him go to Nevada, a place that he had never heard of. He did not come for cows, and he didn't care about cows. He's talking here, he can't bring up the videos or the images that he saw like we could in the last trial. They're not allowed to bring up the arrest of Dave Bundy where he was beat on the side of the road for taking pictures, and this is not in a closure area because the roads can't be closure areas. He's also talking about the image of the First Amendment area. That is the main reason Eric Parker, Stephen Stewart, and Scott Drexler went down to Nevada. Because in America, we do not have a First Amendment area. We have a First Amendment.
That's right.
So he says, Scott got here on the 12th. And then he went to the speech. And in the speech, the sheriff says that the BLM are ceasing operations and they're reopening the Goldview allotment. Then he puts up the picture of the prayer group, was the first to arrive down in the wash. And he shows the picture, and he circles areas. He says, there's no one on the bridge. There's no one in the abutments. We all know from last trial they're trying to say that they had set up militia there. He circles a man in a blue shirt, and he says, Dennis Michael Lynch. And is a gentleman right here, and he's recording. And then there's an objection. They said, Dennis Michael Lynch is subpoenaed by the defense, and he will be here. And he is going to testify that he came into the wash and asked BLM agents, are you really going to shoot these people? Immediately there was objection, and then a sidebar. That sidebar lasted maybe 30 minutes, possibly longer, as the observers and the jury just kind of sat there like, what's going on? Especially the longer it got going, everyone got more restless, kind of interested in what was going on. They come back and he cannot speak of that at all. While this is going on, you know, Eric Parker reads the Constitution to keep his mind off the injustice. The jury can't see it. He has to keep it below the bench, but he does that anytime so that he can keep his emotions in check and make sure that he's not getting too frustrated. Read about the true law. They come back and they say they will strike the Dennis Michael Lynch comment. He goes on to say that the evidence will show a complete disorganized mess. The BLM and police are going to testify that they were scared. And with thousands and thousands of photos and videos, look for the guns pointing at the people. Look, or at the officers. Look for the officers being scared. He said, when you see all this evidence, please try to find evidence that supports these things. The government is putting a protest on trial here. Then he goes to talk about Scott, that he's 47 with a beautiful daughter and a grandson. And that he's a regular American.
And the emails, too, from, that were sent to Scott Drexler, or not sent to him.
No, I already went through that. Okay. So the government calls Sheriff Lombardo, who is the undersheriff. He was the assistant sheriff at the time. They go through with him a little bit about his previous work with the police here in the Metro Police here in Las Vegas. He's been with them since 1988. He's been working his way up the ladder since then. He went to Bunkerville as protection for the sheriff who went to visit with Cliven Bundy. He went to tell Cliven that the BLM office had a cease and desist, and that they arrived at the stage area and there were 200 to 300 people. He stated that when he arrived there that the audience at the stage level area were calm, and that Cliven Bundy arrived in a Humvee with a caravan truck in front, truck behind full with militia or camo people. They shut yours off. He heard Cliven say that he can talk to you on the stage. He's saying that after the sheriff spoke, there was rejoicing from the crowd. But after Cliven spoke, there was anger from the crowd.
Yeah, the mood changed, he said.
They were providing security for Cliven, the men in the camo. And Cliven's speech was unrealistic and demands the crowd got louder. He also said they felt no fear from the law enforcement. The crowd felt no fear from the law enforcement. This is coming from Lombardo himself. The crowd felt no fear from law enforcement. Are they supposed to feel fear from law enforcement?
Objection.
Then they talk about after when the sheriff gets down, that's when the cowboys arrived, and that they had rifles, and that they were completely outnumbered because there was only 4 people, the sheriff, himself, and 2 others, and so they headed back. He then was given command of the Metro down at the ICP and went down to the ICP. Now he's given command of the Metro and Metro alone, not of the BLM and what they're doing. Let's see. When he got there, he set up the skirmish line and snipers. He testified to that. Skirmish line and snipers. The group continued to grow in size and about the size of the people at the stage area.
Back us up real quick on something the sheriff was saying too about the mood. Back to the mood of the crowd. When he was there, because he had said some specifics as far as the crowd was changing, becoming emboldened, that they got louder and they were making derogatory remarks. They had no fear of law enforcement, which you said that, but he went further to elaborate, making derogatory remarks. When they were bringing up being a constitutional sheriff, we heard the video and they said things like, you know, be constitutional, uphold the Constitution.
Do your job, and they called that derogatory. Okay.
Sorry.
In the future, we can leave that to the end so that I can keep my flow going.
Sorry,
He believed that they were understaffed and they could not stop them because of the amount of people, and that they had firearms, and the officers did not have adequate gear to ward them off. He tried to find an informed leader after he set up the skirmish line. He went across and tried to find Dave Bundy and ask about his intent. Dave Bundy said he was there to get the cattle, and he told him that he could not control the crowd. Dave said he had an hour to figure this out with the cattle. Lombardo said he needed 8 hours to a few days, and the situation was becoming dire because people with guns were moving towards the gate. I would have liked to hear how he could see that from where he was at. He made a decision to release the cattle. So this is Lombardo saying he made the decision over the BLM to release the cattle. He did not know if their training or their experience was adequate in a group setting, and that if an accidental fire had happened, there would be bloodshed. And so he would need 500 officers. Once again, he's going to need 500 officers for 200 to 300 people, which at the last trial, what did we find out? Around 47 people had guns. So they need 500 officers to control a crowd of 200 to 300 people where 47 of those people had guns. So is anyone here really good with math? What is the percentage of the crowd that had guns? Because, you know, the prosecution liked to use percentages when they were talking jury. I know it's under a fourth. It's less than 10%. And they're going to need 500 officers to control a crowd of 200 to 300 people with 47 of them having weapons.
And none of those people had the weapons pointed at the BLM. I was there. That's a crock of crap. And the crowd was scared of the BLM.
Less than 5%. We did the math. It's less than 5%. Threats were not against his police officers. He said once again, he gets to the wash. The people are not against the police officers. They are welcoming them. They're like, yes, we finally have actual law enforcement here to put the BLM in check. He also said again he was not confident in the BLM's training and tactics with crowd control, and he wanted to get them out first. Then they played the visit between Lombardo, Love, Dave, and Ryan. Love says that I cannot let you release the cattle. It is against the law and I cannot approve you releasing the cattle. The talk was about giving Ryan and Dave a warning about releasing the cattle and that they could be arrested at a later time. So here we have the conspiracy. This is proof of the conspiracy, but not the conspiracy of the protesters against the federal government, but the conspiracy against the federal government to get the Bundys to incriminate themselves. So here they're saying Lombardo said, release the cattle. And Dan Love said, no, we're going to go and make them release the cattle and tell them if you release the cattle, you can be arrested at a later date. The decision to release the cattle was based on how many supporters were there.
Yep.
Then they brought in another exhibit, a SWAT officer in standard gear. And then they asked, well, is that standard gear from BLM agents? And he said he cannot testify to that because he can only testify to Metro, which is nice. He's at least, you know, stating truth in here. The BLM eventually left the area and the cattle were released. He said, were you concerned for safety when the cattle were released? He said, yes, he was concerned for safety and he was there for over 5 hours. Then we go into cross-examination. Tanasi gets up immediately and starts talking about men with radios, some having radios, some having communication. Talking about the difference between the guys in camo. Do you have something to add to this? Because I was a little late. Okay. The camo, Tanasi's very beginning.
Cause I have a lot more notes in between is what my problem is right now.
Okay. In Kwanzaa.
Oh yeah, I said that they were Kwanzaa. Oh, okay, I know where you are now. The camel and Kwanzaa related uniform. Kwanzaa, like they look like military but aren't, is what he was referring to. And so basically what they're trying to state right there and paint a picture of right there is that citizens don't seem to, apparently it's a criminal act. It's kind of like the hat thing all over again.
Only the military is allowed to have bulletproof vests.
Or the BLM.
Or tactical vests, even if they're not bulletproof. Or camo.
Yes.
Only the military can wear camo, and if you wear camo, you're going to be called quasi and militia, and it's a bad word, and it's negative.
And it also instigates that because Clive Bundy had security.
Private security.
Private security. So what? We're not allowed to have our own private security.
Politicians can have private security, but as American citizens, we are not allowed to hire private security, apparently, as they're portraying it in the courtroom. Let's go back. Okay. He asked if he saw Mr. Stewart, Parker, or Drexler, or Loveland there. He said no, he didn't. Or he said, I cannot testify to that because he could or couldn't. There was, they talked about the SWAT and TAC gear again, and there was objection, and another sidebar. So here we are. First day, opening statements has taken half the day. We have had direct examination from one witness, and we've had two sidebars that have almost taken up an hour of the court time. What are we doing in here? It's getting to be ridiculous.
Oh, but stay with us.
The other thing is that before they used to do the sidebars, they would let the jury out of the courtroom, and us, the court observers, and the media could witness their arguments. And the media could then report on those arguments, and we could report on those arguments. Well, they don't want us up in there. They don't want us allowed to see what they're arguing behind in the sidebars, so they changed their tactics. I believe that this is the reason the last day of jury selection I was singled out and harassed and told that if I do anything in the courtroom, anything at all, including mouth things to the defendants or, smile at my husband, that I will be kicked out. Not for a day like they would the last trial, but for the entire duration of the trial. Let me mind you, I've only been spoken to one time the entire last trial. I have been as good as I possibly could be. And so that's exactly what they're trying to get the people out of the courtroom. They're trying to keep the media from the truth as well as the jurors. Okay. So then Tanasi goes back in. He says, you've decided to have SWAT regress. And he says, no. SWAT was put there to protect the inner perimeter. They have different levels of gear than regular police. Of course, that was objected to again. And then you have advised the SWAT team to regress. He said, no. Then he said, well, can I show you your prior testimony? And would that refresh your memory? He said, no, it wouldn't, but they showed him. They showed him his testimony from the last statement twice, from the last trial twice. And where he said that he had the SWAT team regress. He testified that he had the SWAT team regress because he didn't want to increase the situation and the aggression level by showing people in SWAT gear out there. That's why he didn't let his police officers put on their vests that they had in the vehicles with them. It was because they wanted to de-escalate the situation, not escalate the situation.
And this question was objected to multiple times, right? But he had to rephrase the question.
Over and over again. They weren't going to do another sidebar after they had just finished twice.
Almost did.
But they were almost there. Then he comes back to, on the 12th, no arrests were made. Are the people, and then he asked, Tanasi asked, are the people supposed to fear the police officers? Of course, this was objected to again, and they weren't allowed to go on. Then Jess came in. Talked about walking across the street with Dave Bundy for communication. Communication helps de-escalate things. That he met with Dave Bundy one time prior. and that he decided an hour and a half before meeting with David, he decided to let the cattle be released. That it was 15 minutes before the body footage of the meeting between Lombardo, Love, Dave, and Ryan Bundy. They tried to get this piece of evidence in. That's a video of the what is that? Not the SWAT team. What is the skirmish line?
Skirmish line.
The skirmish line coming across the street to talk with Dave Bundy with Lombardo. He's there. He's testifying it's fair and accurate. They won't let it in. That's what the big sidebar was about. And so here we are. He watched it for a while. We're all saying, well, they're talking about this. They're discussing what's going on in this video, but we can't see the video. Jess starts to pull up the speech again, the speech on the stage. Ammon starts speaking. He welcomes the sheriff. He tells the crowd, you need to be respectful to the sheriff. You need to treat him with respect because he's an elected official and he has the authority of us. The judge stops him and says, why are you replaying this video? And Leventhal says, well, I've done this before. This is how we've done this, is we play it and we talk about, and I have my questions to the video. And she says, no, we've already seen the video, ask your question. And if he doesn't remember, we'll watch the video again. So here, once again, we're seeing exactly what happened in Oregon. They have switched tactics. They're going back to, you will only see the evidence once, and then it's all verbal arguments. Once again, they go into the camel people arriving with Cliven, that they were the crowd was calm, they got louder with celebration after Cliven. They talked about how the BLM was lined up at the gate, but no people were on the bridge. Leventhal asked this to Lombardo. He said, well, were there BLM lined up at that gate? And he said, yes, there were BLM lined up. And then he said, well, were there people on the bridge? And he went back and forth. At first he said yes, and he said no. When you first got there, and you're arriving as all the protesters are arriving, were there people on the bridge? And he says no.
It appeared to me at first that Lombardo was even trying to avoid the question.
Lombardo was trying to avoid the question and kind of skirt around it, and he had to keep going back into that.
Rewording it, yeah.
He says Love was in charge, that Lombardo was not in charge of the cattle operation until he decided to take it over. There was an objection to that. Was there anyone on the other side? Lombardo went across to talk to Dave Bundy and to try to de-escalate the situation. He asked, where was your other undersheriff? And he talks about in between post 1 and post 2. And he says, well, was he over there to de-escalate the situation on the BLM side? There was an objection to that. And the judge ruled that she did not see the relevance in it because there's nothing to de-escalate on the BLM side, because they can point weapons at you as American citizens for protesting, for objecting to what they're doing. They're allowed to point weapons at you, and they don't have anyone that they have to respond to about that. They have no authority over them that's going to say what you did was wrong, and we know that now. He said, you were not comfortable with the training experience the BLM had with groups and crowds. And he said, yes, because my training experience is that's not the role of the BLM. Perez asked one question alone. Did you see Ricky Loveland? Then we go into the government's redirect. You were asked about accidental discharge. He said, yes. What other factors were you concerned about? Officers. Safety. So he said, Lombardo says, the officer safety, the safety of the Nevada Highway Patrol, and the safety of the BLM. If there had been a firefight. Then they asked the defendants if they wanted to re-cross-examine. They all said no. So the judge wasn't happy with that last question and how the government got that out. So she decided to ask her own question on the prosecutor's side. She decided to ask, well, you said you weren't worried about accidental discharge. Were you ever worried about intentional discharge? This is the judge asking a question that the prosecution asked, that Lombardo answered, and she didn't like the answer the way that came out, so she reworded the question herself and asked it. This is something that is unheard of. I have never seen it before. So then when she's done and she gets her question answered, obviously it was a yes. She asked the jury, hey jury, do you guys have any questions? Why don't you write them down on a piece of paper and hand them to the end? Don't write your number on them, but write them down on a piece of paper and ask them to the end. So here, once again, we have one witness. We have 2 sidebars that have gone on almost to an hour. We have one judge that is not happy with a question that the prosecution asked and got an answer to, so she decided to reword it herself and re-ask it, and now the jury is allowed to ask questions. What is going on here? Who is going to stand up and come down here and tell Judge Gloria Navarro that this is not okay? This is not how our judicial system works. This is not right. You know, it's not enough that they've made it so that we have no defense. We can't bring in the arrest of Dave Bundy. We can't bring in Margaret Houston being thrown to the ground and Ammon Bundy being tased and had attack dogs sicked on him. We can't bring in any problems that the BLM were pointing weapons and aggressing this situation from the very get-go. That's not enough. They have to stack the jury, and now they're going to make, the judge is going to ask her own questions for the prosecution, and we're going to make sure that the jury fully understands everything, which was totally stupid in this case because we've only had one witness. So all of the jury's questions, and mind you, there were quite a few of them, were about information that wouldn't even come in with this witness. Okay, so the first one was there was a reference made to a prior trial. And she says there are different hearings in criminal cases with multiple testimonies, and we're going to leave it at that. Lie! Number 2, okay, so already what we see is the jury seeing right through this. Yep. Number 2, what was the operation before they decided to release? Was the plan to release the cattle or ship them out? Once again, she says that this person cannot testify to that, so that'll be a question to ask later on. They were also asking about the meaning of cease and desist, and that was they were stopping operations and they were to stop doing what they were doing. There's another, what is there a command relationship between the ICP structure present at the time and 2014? Also, this guy can't answer that question, so that's a question for later on. Number 4, and mind you, that jury person had multiple questions. That was multiple questions on one piece of paper. Number 4, did you know if their firearms were loaded? Lombardo was actually asked this question. He said, no, I do not know if their firearms were loaded. Number 5, what was the relationship between the Las Vegas Metro Police and the BLM? And he said the BLM had operational authority that they then relinquished when he decided to go in and take over. Now, we weren't able to get into why he decided to go in and take over. The BLM had incident command structure prior to the Metro being there, and that he was in a meeting prior to the 12th, that he knew about that structure, and that Saul Laurel was the main person, and Dan Love was under him, but Dan Love was the incident commander, and he was in charge the day of the 12th. That is all we have for today. We will be back again tomorrow at 9 a.m. where they will be bringing another witness. I wonder how many sidebars and jury questions and judge questions we will have tomorrow.
Anybody else have a question?
Anybody else here have something they want to say? Or
anybody got a question?
Any questions?
Want to say something?
Did she, when the defense attorneys asked a question, did she say that was a stupid question? Did I hear that, or was that, okay.
She did say, yeah, she did. It was a stupid question that he needed to reword it. But she's always done that. No, she said that to the defendant, the defense. That their question was stupid, but she'll let him go ask it anyway.
Oh, now I know you're talking about. That happened.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that did happen. I know.
I know everyone down here is absolutely shocked. We have media that has sat in courtrooms before. They're absolutely shocked. We have lawyers that have sat in courtrooms before. They're absolutely shocked. People, you do not believe what is going on in the courtroom until you spend an hour upstairs. It's unbelievable, and we're also, the courtroom's full. We've got our supporters on the prosecution side, which is amazing. Thank you for all the support. This has been huge. Once again, huge thank you to ACE and American Warrior Revolution and all the people that came down and supported us, because without this, our message is not getting out. Thank you to Doc over here for having me on his live stream the other night. helping get our Adam Kokak for visiting inside the courtroom today. It's been amazing. We need to keep it up. Obviously, the stand event that we did the other night got the media in there because there was a lot more media in there than there has been before.
Yep.
What I want to see is we want it kept up. We need people down here. We need people to see the injustice. We need people to be harassed by these marshals so they can write up and say, you know, I wasn't doing anything, and they're coming over to me and telling me you can't sigh, you can't go, you can't smile, you gotta have a smile on your face, you can have a piece of gum in your mouth. We need you here. We need you to see the injustice for yourself, because if it goes on without people seeing it, there's no hope.
And the sheriff, not once, said he was concerned about anybody with the officers.
That's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. So once again, Sheriff Lombardo, he says he was in fear of his officer's safety. He was in fear of Nevada Highway Patrol. He was in fear of the lives of the BLM. Guess what he didn't say he was in fear of? He wasn't in fear of the people's lives, of the protesters' lives. He didn't care about those 200 to 300 people. He didn't have any thoughts or any fears for the men, women, and children down in the wash, that they would be murdered like Ruby Ridge, like Waco. He's only in fear of his officers. But he also did say that the people were not in fear of the police. Like, are the people supposed to be in fear of the police? Is that the police today, nowadays? Is that the people are supposed to be in fear? Because this is coming from a sheriff himself. Now, I can say this, that I saw a difference between Lombardo's testimony today and last time, and that he was a lot more truthful. He answered some of those questions that were bad for the prosecution. Like, no, he didn't know if their guns were loaded or not. So I do have to commend him on that. Thank you, Lombardo, for speaking the truth up there. But you should have been concerned about the citizens, about we the people who elected you and put you in office. And I hope you take that home and think about that for next time.
Do you think that there's potential that stunt they pulled today with the jury being able to ask questions, and then they did the sidebar where the judge went through the questions first? Do you think that might have anything to do with trying to find a way around getting a favored jury nullification for themselves or anything like that? I have a couple theories on that.
Very possibly.
Yeah.
Also, once they've opened this door, they can't shut it, because the jury now expects that after every witness, they're going to be allowed to ask their own questions. So, you know, this could work in our favor too. Or, you know, as we saw, a couple of the questions were like, well, you know, who's in command here? And they want to get to the bottom of this. And that encourages me, because that's exactly what a jury should be doing. Getting to the bottom and finding the truth. And that does encourage me, because the fourth branch of our government, we the people up in that jury room want to know the truth, and they're sitting on that jury, and let's hope that they can get to it.
Amen.
All right.
Disarm the Park Service.
We're facing the decision to either get the cattle or be the cattle.
But we're staying here until they're gone.
We want those arms picked up, boy.
The crowd is now moving forward toward the barrier. The police have been telling everybody they're going to shoot if we don't move back.
As we approach the one-year anniversary of the standoff at the Bundy Ranch, I want to take another look at what happened, especially in light of the lies and slander from media like Glenn Beck and the dangerous characterization by Obama, Harry Reid, Homeland Security, that labeled the community standing together against brutality as domestic terrorists. On April 7, 2014, Paul Joseph Watson wrote an article, Armed Feds Prepare for Showdown with Nevada Cattle Rancher, with the subtitle, Ruby Ridge-Style Standoff Brewing, as Bundy says he's prepared to be killed. The property rights dispute had been going on for decades, but now things were beginning to come to a head. Hundreds of federal officials, aided by helicopters, low-flying aircraft, hired cowboys, began rounding up Bundy's cattle the preceding weekend as Bundy accused them of trespassing. And as supporters from the local community and protesters headed to the area to demand that the feds back off, the BLM had created a First Amendment area out in the middle of nowhere, where demonstrators could voice their concerns, but nowhere else. This area right here, this small area here, was cordoned off with orange temporary construction barriers marked for free speech zone. It just shows you how quickly your free speech zones can disappear when you allow them to be contained to a very small area. It's gone. But we're here, and we want to tell the BLM something about how upset we are with what's going on here, but there's no government agency here to listen to us. That's the whole reason you don't confine people to remote areas from what's happening. Not only had the federal agents been confiscating Bundy's cattle, they had also set up agents with sniper rifles, pointed at the ranchers, pointed at the protesters. The crowd had been building throughout the week, and on Saturday there was a huge crowd. To defuse it, the sheriff came in the morning to address the crowd and tell them the powers that be had graciously consented to allow the last rancher remaining in business in the area to continue grazing. Never mind that he had had most of his cattle rustled by the army of BLM contractors for the past several weeks.
With that being said, I believe a press release has already been put forth that the BLM is going to cease this operation. The Gold Butte allotment will be reopened to the public.
Much to the surprise of the sheriff, Bundy said that wasn't good enough.
Sheriff, this is what we the people are asking this morning. Disarm the Park Service.
Right! Yeah!
At Lakemead and Red Rock Park and all other parks that the federal government claims they have jurisdiction over.
Yeah!
Take your county bulldozers and loaders and tear down the entrance places, where they ticket us and where they enter us and make us citizens pay their fees. You take down you get the county equipment out there and tear those things down this morning.
Yes, sir. Immediately!
What they wanted was for him to exercise his authority as the only lawful law enforcement in the area and to disarm the BLM agents and contractors who had been pointing their sniper rifles at the protesters and ranchers, confiscate their weapons, tell them to leave the area, and then stack the weapons on stage. Bundy gave him 1 hour to do so. At the end of the time limit, Bundy announced that it looked like the sheriff wasn't going to do anything. No one was surprised. But what did surprise us, and surprise the Federals, was his announcement.
I guess he's not coming, so I guess we had presents. We thought we had a sheriff here, but evidently we don't have a sheriff here. We're going to go and take the rest of them out of the compound trails up here above the freeway.
I was one of the first ones to get down to the area where the standoff would occur.
Okay, people are now moving. They stopped for prayer.
They had vehicles, they had guns that were pointing at us, and they had shields. And they had a loudspeaker that was announcing that they would shoot if we did not leave the area. The only mainstream media that was in attendance was one cameraman from Fox News. He desperately wanted to get over to the BLM and interview them, but he was scared to death, as you can see in this video, that they were going to shoot him. He kept announcing that he was with Fox News. He pulled up his shirt to show that he wasn't armed. They kept telling him to go back. They did not want him to come to interview them. They were in a fighting stance. They had 80 different cars, each of them with just one BLM agent.
Now, it's a standoff. I've got a count of 107 vehicles.
107, okay.
Going on the road.
That's right.
The thing of it is all 107 of those vehicles were armed with armed army.
Yes.
That always fascinated me. Why would the state highway patrol allow an army like that onto their highway, and then why would that army be able to pass through the city of Mesquite without any resistance, through the state of Arizona without any resistance, through the port of entry into Utah without any resistance, and that army disappeared in the state of Utah, And not one media, no question. That army went across the United States without one question asked.
An army of BLM agents, 107 cars of armed men. This is exactly what the Posse Comitatus Act prohibits. It's not just a prohibition of the military being used for law enforcement. Understand that Posse Comitatus is Latin for power of the community. The Posse Comitatus Act prohibits the president from usurping the true Posse Comitatus, the true power of the community, with his own posse of armed federal agents. There were clear distinctions, too, from Ferguson and other places where we've seen protests about a government that's out of control. In Ferguson, businesses in the community were destroyed and burned. As InfoWars has pointed out, in Ferguson, these looters were coming from outside of the community. They were not the core protesters. And of course, the same thing could have happened at Bundy Ranch. I believe the reason that it didn't was because the militia threw out people who were dangerous or provocateurs. People like Jared Miller, who later shot 2 cops in Vegas. But rather than give the militia credit for expelling people like Jared Miller, the media used it to demonize them. Another difference about the Bundy Ranch was that there was a clear, achievable objective. The people were peaceful, but they were determined.
The police have been telling everybody they're going to shoot if we don't move back. People are moving forward with their hands in the air, holding flags with both hands in the air. It's a mixture of people on foot, as you can see, people on foot, and cowboys.
They decided they're going to pull those pins, but it's only going to be Bundy and his son. That's it.
It's the people or not, and you guys need to leave.
Okay.
You need to leave. That's the
I'm telling you, you need to de-escalate the situation. I'm imploring upon you, you're responsible. Listen.
You are on Nevada State.
Okay.
And it's time. No, the time is now.
We're doing that.
No, the time is
push these people back so they can do the same thing. Push them back so they can do the same thing.
Cattle down in 30 minutes. But we're staying here until they're gone. Okay? That's what we're doing.
I can back some of these guys up if you promise they won't run me and my partner down.
Whatever you tell us to do. As long as it's not to compromise this mission. We will do. You have authority.
All I ask you to do is just hang tight.
Okay. So we're all right where we're at?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is 1776. No, it's not.
That's right. What happened, what we call the Boston Massacre, was an angry mob. You can call them a bunch of drunk rowdies. It's just like guys that like barroom brawls. I just love being in a fight. There's guys like that. They're belligerent. They'll fight anybody.
We were misrepresented by powerful voices.
So these people who hold themselves out to be patriots are not. They're nothing more than domestic terrorists.
We rode over there. We didn't come charging, guns a-blazing. We were not armed. There were a couple of cowboys that had rifles in their boots, their saddle boots. There was 1 or 2 riders that may have had a sidearm on their persons. None of them drew them from their scabbards, from the boots.
I know Glenn Beck wasn't there, but he can see from the videos taken by the people who were there that nearly all of the people at the standoff were not armed, and those that were had them holstered, even as the bureaucrats, all of whom were armed, pointed weapons and threatened to shoot. People with no guns in their hands, marching in defiance to troops threatening to shoot them. That was in the spirit of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But let us not forget that it was Gandhi who said, among the many misdeeds of British rule in India, history will look upon the act of depriving a whole nation of arms as the blackest. Whether or not you agree with Cliven Bundy's position on his grazing rights, everyone should be appalled at the conduct of the BLM, its agents, and its hired contractors. Free speech containment areas, government snipers pointed at protesters and ranchers for weeks, violent, brutal confrontations with peaceful protesters, all manifestations of a government that is dangerously out of control. The Bundy standoff wasn't just a news event. What we saw with the showdown was that there are still Americans that won't be treated like slaves. There are still Americans that will stand with their neighbors against an army of federal bureaucrats and contractors that threaten and brutalize them. What we covered in the rural West was a government out of control and acting provocatively, as we would see again in just a couple of months in Ferguson. Unlike Ferguson, the crowd would not turn into a mob attacking its neighbors, burning their businesses. The community stood together with each other resolutely and in a determined way made it clear that they were not looking for a fight, but they weren't going to back down either. What the Bundy family and their neighbors demonstrated to the nation was that power truly lies with the community, and that when the community stands together, neighbor with neighbor, against a violent and brutal government, the thugs will back down and slink away. Unlike Glenn Beck and Obama, Thomas Jefferson would have approved of what happened at the Bundy Ranch standoff. He wrote in 1787, "What country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that his people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms." For InfoWars Nightly News, I'm David Knight.
Hi, I'm Alex Jones. Most of you know me as a syndicated radio host and documentary filmmaker. When I got on air 20
They always were after us for something. It's always been water. It's just they want the water, and if you don't have the means to fight them, you lost the ranch.
Burns is a quiet town, but on a bitterly cold day, people are gathering to protest.
Militia groups from out of state came to show support for 2 Oregon ranchers who must go back to prison for starting fires that burned on federal land, even though they already served time for the charges.
It was actually making the national news in a big way.
The case has caused a stir as both were charged under the anti-terrorism law, sparking debate over the federal government's authority.
Why did they charge him with an anti-terrorism statute? The only reason I could think of was to put him in jail as long as they possibly could. But then everything went crazy.
All right, let's take you to Oregon now, where armed protesters have taken over the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
Call me an occupier, call me a terrorist, call me a dadgum ignorant redneck, I don't care. I am here for Dwight Hammond, and they had better get out of that prison.
You know, they say that there was an armed standoff in Harney County. That is a total bullshit lie. Are ranchers in a remarkable place in southern Oregon.
The Hammonds are the kind of people that you want to live next door. Really, really nice, down-home folks. Dwight is a very soft-spoken man. Very kind, helpful. He'll do anything if you ask him to help you out. Steve is active, quiet and soft-spoken like his father, very family-oriented, a very nice human, and a very hard-working human.
They're very compassionate people. You can find other ranchers in the community
that say, hey, you know, I needed to ship my cattle out and I didn't have any way of shipping them, and the Hammonds showed up with their trucks and hauled my cattle for me.
While I was building my log home up on the property that I purchased, they actually came one afternoon with a picnic lunch. And this is 45, 50 miles away. Those are the kind of people the Hammonds are.
Dwight Hammond is my husband, and we've been married for 55 years. We grew up together. In 1964, we first moved here from Northern California. The tending of the population was to come north, and we were raising cattle, and the highways were becoming more congested, and highways and cows don't really mix. And we finally found this place that we liked. Dwight had the problem of telling his father that we weren't going to live in Northern California for our whole lifetime. One day he said he was going to go and tell Dad today that we were moving. He was gone for 2 or 3 hours, and he came back, and I said, how'd it go? You'd never guess. He wants to go with us. So we all moved up here.
It's a very big ranch. And it's on a place called Steens Mountain. Well, it doesn't look like any mountain in the world except itself. And it's in Harney County.
So Harney County is 10,000 square miles. It's about 2/3 high desert. Most of it is above 4,000 feet in elevation. And we have several 100,000 acres of state lands here. And the county is bigger than 9 states in this nation. Harney County in general is a community made up of small town folks who work hard for a living, ranching families that go back for generations.
You can see why the Hammonds wanted to ranch there. They, like most ranchers, have a grazing permit, which means they have private-based commensurable property. That's their own, and it has been. And they own the water on that.
What's known as the Dust Bowl, which is the Hammonds' property, there's a drainage that comes off of the mountain that actually has quite a bit of water.
Our ranch is special in that the water comes up on our ranch. The laws are in the state of Oregon, if it comes up on your ranch, you can use it until it goes off. You use the water or you lose it.
Adjacent to the Hammond property, on 3 sides, is the National Wildlife Refuge.
Mount Ure National Wildlife Refuge is 190,000 acres in the middle of Harney County.
It used to be all private land ranches, and through the Antiquities Act, President Roosevelt determined that there would be a bird refuge there.
The Fish and Wildlife Service decided that they were going to manage it so that all of the resources went to the wildlife, including water rights that they didn't own.
Even though that the National Wildlife Refuge has water, the Hammond property has a good deal of water. The Hammond property would augment the National Wildlife Refuge land greatly.
The refuge system made a decision to survey their property lines and move their fences, created all kinds of issues for access for the Hammonds, access to their home.
The Fish and Wildlife Service built a fence, or tried to build a fence, around the Hammond's water. And somebody got an old antique road grader and put it in the way of the construction equipment.
Dwight had parked a piece of machinery down there because we had a bunch of cattle in there. There was 1,100 acres in that field. If they came in and built the fence and we didn't know it, the cattle would die from lack of water.
In 1994, there was an altercation that occurred where federal agents had come onto Hammond's property and handcuffed Dwight and drug him off to prison.
And so the feds had to come take him up to Portland and put him in jail in a federal holding cell. And they stayed there for longer than they should.
We took it to court. It was a big, long trial, and we ended up winning. And then they did nothing to remove the fence or to make it accessible to us. And we knew that if we removed the fence or if we did anything, we would be charged with destruction of federal property or whatever. So I went back to the judge and asked him, what's the next step? He just shook his head and was bewildered himself. He said he couldn't do anything. He couldn't even subpoena a federal agency to come into his courtroom. They wouldn't show up. A little bit later, we got into water problems again, same kind of a scenario. You just had to be so careful because they were just waiting to throw somebody in jail for some reason. It's just they want the water, and if you don't have the means to fight them, you lost the ranch. It was kind of like cancer. They called us to Salem and threw a 19-count indictment over 18 years, I believe, for setting every fire that they didn't have already tagged to somebody else. Anything that had happened on that place was put into a case that was charged against Dwight or Stephen.
It was a huge number of fires that they were accused of committing. Absolutely absurd. The first arson that they accused them of occurred in 2001, and it took them 10 years to file any charges. I mean, my goodness, 10 years. What Dwight and Steve did isn't in the same category as arson. What Dwight and Steve did was start a fire to try and make their land better. That's what a prescribed burn does. It's a common practice within the ranching industries. They lit the fire in early afternoon after the temperatures had warmed up on their property, and then at night the winds turn around and blow from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of the valley again. So that takes the fire and pushes it back on itself. And the temperatures cool off and the fires lay down and go out. But what happens to the grass is when it comes back healthier, the brush is gone, and it's actually better for elk and cows in the future. One section of the fire trail ran up a draw and burned 138 acres of BLM allotment land. 138 acres is huge if you consider it in a highly dense populated city, but out here there's hundreds of thousands of acres where you have uninterrupted views, really nothing, just wide open spaces. So 138 acres is just this ridge top here and a little bit of that finger over there. Normally what occurs is they get what's called a fire trespass from the BLM, because what happens is it takes that grass out of grazing season for a couple of years, and so the BLM loses like $400. It is not against the law anywhere in the United States to manage a prescribed burn. Then the next fires were a series of fires that occurred in 2006. The 2006 fires, when those occurred, it was a lightning storm beyond the lightning storm. There were like 1,700 lightning strikes. The whole goddamn mountain was on fire. Steve calls the BLM to find out if there was a fire burning up on Moon Hill. Sure enough, there is a fire. Well, that's where all their winter feed is. So what Steve did was start a back burn. You have a fire that's moving towards you, and what you try to do is, if you can get in front of the fire enough, you burn a section. You burn some land to remove the fuel. He lit the back burn, burned his own property, and then it burned 1 acre. 1 acre of BLM land, and the fire didn't go any further. What they charged them with was the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Death Penalty law of arson. So say I was Timothy McVeigh and I blew up the Oklahoma federal building and it started a fire that then went along, they could charge me under the statute with blowing things up, killing people, and arson. That is the arson they were charged with.
Our family members are not terrorists. I don't know how you could put a charge like terrorism when you look at the things that are going on in the world and compare that to ranch life in Eastern Oregon.
Why did they charge him with an anti-terrorism statute? The only reason I could think of was to put him in jail as long as they possibly could. Including opening and closing statements, the trial took 8 days. The 2 fires that they were found guilty of were the 2 fires that they had admitted to starting. The 2001 prescribed burn that got away from them onto their allotment land for 138 acres, and then the 2006 fire that Steve had lit to protect their winter feed. The jury was tasked of finding innocence or guilt, whether they were part of a conspiracy, whether they had maliciously started all of those fires that the BLM had accused them of starting. But they were not aware that the charges brought against them were from the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Death Penalty Act that carried a mandatory minimum of 5 years.
What's a mandatory minimum sentence? If, for example, you are convicted of kidnapping in the first degree, you're going to go to prison for 90 months. And because it's a mandatory minimum, you're going to do every minute of those 90 months. You're not going to get paroled out early. You get a 90-month sentence, you're going to do 90 months.
No, I don't think the jury would have convicted Dwight and Steve if they would have understood that the penalty was a 5-year mandatory minimum. Well, Dwight's 74 years old, and to have Dwight be convicted of an anti-terrorism charge for 5 years is potentially a death sentence for him. The lawyers talked to the judge, and the Hammonds agreed to accept the jury's verdict as they had been stated thus far, and they would accept whatever the judge sentenced them to. And the prosecution then spouted up and said that he agreed with that, but they would have to give up their appellate rights as well as their 2255 rights, that they gave up all rights of appealing.
There is nobody that can sanely say that this was terrorism. The presiding judge, Michael Hogan, even said that it would be a terrible injustice. In fact, the words he used were, it would shock the conscience, quote unquote, to require that the father and son ranchers go to prison for 5 years for what they did.
He gave them what he thought was a just sentence, which was 3 months for Dwight and a year for Stephen. I hate to think that your government could take away your ranch, but it's obvious, if you look back at it and don't have a biased opinion, that they wanted our ranch. Fire, if that's what it took, they'd take whatever was handed to them.
When there were new states coming in, there was what was called public land. Now, it meant something in those days. It doesn't anymore. But what it meant then was it was for sale to the public. Come to Ohio and buy this section of land and pay us not much, and it's yours. We need the population. We need to settle this new state. They made it easy. But there was a trick. Every new state had to sign a compact in what's called an enabling act that would enable you to vote and become a state with the federal government, that all of the citizens of this new state now and forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated lands of this new state. That meant that the states didn't own the land except for the part that had already been bought. If it was private property already, the federal government didn't bother about that. They did bother about the stuff that was left. The meaning of public land had changed. It just meant not something you could buy as time went on. It meant something that the federal government owned. What is the government going to do with this land that's supposed to be public?
The Southwest might seem a lonely place, big and barren, of not much use, an empty wasteland. But it does grow grass, and from that grass flows one of America's greatest production lines, the cattle of the beef industry.
They began to see that some of this land was not going to be used by settlers. It was too arid, it was not fertile, and so the Taylor Grazing Act allowed for ranchers to go on public lands, raise their cattle or sheep, and pay the federal government some minimum amount.
This is the land, the public land. It belongs to you and me. More than 300 million acres of land. More than an acre for each American. The bulk of the land is in the western states, including Alaska. Far from many Americans, yet this land is important to us all, no matter where we live. It's managed by the Interior Department's Bureau of Land Management.
The Bureau of Land Management was formed in 1946, designed to really meet the needs of ranchers and mining companies. That all changed in 1976.
Controversy over the use of the resources of the public lands has intensified in recent years. The Bureau must resolve conflicting interests within the multiple use and sustained yield principles of the 1976 Federal Land Policy and Management Act. The Act directs the Bureau to administer the public lands for the benefit of all Americans.
With FLPMA, the federal government said, from now on, the public domain lands that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management will be managed in a multiple-use philosophy. We will provide for recreation and environmental issues, and will meet the Endangered Species Act. No longer was the BLM merely there to do what ranchers and mining companies wanted them to do. That's when the unhappiness began with the miners and the ranchers.
Story that has captured national headlines and is continuing to stir controversy in a rural part of southern Nevada.
The root of the issue is a 20-year-long battle between a farmer and the federal government. Rancher Cliven Bundy has refused to pay grazing rights for his cattle that roam the public land surrounding his 160-acre farm.
But the BLM considers the animals as trespass cattle, and since Bundy will not pay $1 million in grazing fees accrued over the years, officials have now hired cowboys and helicopters to round those cattle up.
In the Bunker Hill situation, to my understanding, the Bundy family had been ranching in that part of Nevada before BLM became an agency. And when BLM was formed, the deal was they would improve grazing lands and improve water for cattle. As time moved on, the deal changed. And it was no longer about improving grazing and water rights. It was about the restriction and access to those lands, which those ranchers generationally had relied on.
My rights are all older than BLM even existed, but my rights were created through beneficial use, and so beneficial use means we use the forage and the water from the very first pioneers come here.
Bundy had an argument that he had a grandfathered right to graze on that land because he was doing it for the last 140 years.
Grazing allotment requires a permit, and there is a fee attached to that permit. Mr. Bundy decided he was not going to pay those grazing permits.
He thought he had no duty to pay for a grazing permit because he had everything that the permit required. He had private commensurable property, which is what the law of the permit says. You have to have that. Well, he did. And he had to have water. And if memory serves, he had adjudicated water rights where he had the water. And so he figured, why should I pay the feds for that right? Now, the feds will tell you what the answer is, and that is because we say so.
When you don't pay your grazing permit, it's just like if you rent an apartment and you don't pay your rent, you get evicted.
Federal Rangers stood with tasers ready and dogs poised to go on the attack.
What'd they do, Evan? Tased me twice. Tased it?
These protesters came within inches of law enforcement trying to get the BLM to leave this section of public land.
We're sick of you being here!
The Bundy family says they're willing to put themselves in danger, not just for cattle, but essentially their livelihood. They claim federal rangers are killing their cattle in the process of rounding them up.
In 2014, they came down up on my family and put us under siege and threatened that they were going to kill us, that this would be another Waco or Ruby Ridge, in their own words, if we resisted in any way. They were killing the cattle from the helicopter and from the ground. They were separating the baby calves from their mothers, leaving the baby calves, brand new baby calves out in the desert to die.
They ended up calling a virtual who's who people's army into southern Nevada, armed patriot groups, militia members, who said that they would act out violently if the federal government went to enforce court orders.
It's time the states take back our public lands. The BLM doesn't know how to manage jack.
We rallied and went up and gave them a choice to either kill us or to leave.
It's the people or not. You guys need to leave. You need to leave. That's the
They stood in a line, facing a line as big as theirs of federal agents. And somebody said, stand down. And that was the smartest thing I ever saw the federal government do.
When you have an event in a particular location at a particular time where you have teams of people coming from across the country who are armed to challenge the enforcement of an order, sometimes a tactical retreat is the best way to avoid a loss of life. And I think the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management made the correct decision at that time in retreating. The problem was people in the anti-government, the wise use movement, took that as a victory. And what it did was cause the rhetoric to rise to a level where they were looking for other Bunkervilles to take place in different parts of the West.
We're going to kick the BLM out of the state, kick all the other federal agencies out of the state that aren't authorized to be here, and get this right. I'm confident that our state will get it right, and I'm confident that all the other states will get it right as well.
It brought attention to the plight of ranchers, of miners, of timber workers. They had the ability to stand up to the suppressive force that BLM has been exerting throughout the country.
So when the judge sentenced him, he said it would be cruel and unusual if I demanded that they spend the 5-year minimum in prison for 140 acres. He said that. So he sentenced Dwight to 3 months and Stephen to 1 year and 1 day. Dwight and Stephen did their time. They came home. After they came home, the U.S. federal government decided to pursue the mandatory minimum.
The sentencing judge at that time deviated from what the law allowed as far as sentencing guidelines went. The prosecution
filed an appeal on the decision, and that appeal went to the Ninth Circuit Court.
The Ninth Circuit Court said the original sitting judge did not have the authority to not give the mandatory minimum. Judges absolutely have no authority when it comes to sentencing. They just, it says mandatory minimum, so that's what you got to give.
We thought, no, this can't, no way, we've been through all this stuff, and everybody said mandatory minimum under this charge is 5 years.
That's where the Hammonds, I think, really didn't understand the implications that if they gave up their right to appeal, they thought that the prosecution wouldn't have any rights to appeal either, and that wasn't the case. The Hammonds were resentenced, and they reported to prison on January 4th.
Double jeopardy is a circumstance where you cannot be tried twice for the same charge. The Hammonds were not tried twice. What happened was the Court of Appeals sent the case back to the trial court and said, you will do it right. You will sentence them according to the law. The judge made a legal error, and the Court of Appeals corrected it, and that's why the Hammonds are back in prison now. It's not double jeopardy.
Why should they pay for the judiciary system making a mistake? I think if you serve your time, you served your time.
We are supposed to have a fair and balanced justice system. You know, sending a 74-year-old rancher back to prison after he served his sentence in entirety is not an American value. It's unjust.
I think the judge that made that decision should be sanctioned. I still think that today. He violated the very rules that he was obligated to defend.
The rule was pretty plain, and I don't know what a mandatory minimum is, but we've had a bunch of attorneys sitting there for I don't know how many days, and all of them know what it is. And I can't believe that this is what's going to come down at us, that they've already served their time. That part of your life was over with. Well, that's not the case if the government's after you. The doorbell rang early in the morning, and I don't get up really early, so I'm thinking bad thoughts of him already. I answered the door, and he said that he was Hammond Bundy, and he asked me if I was Mrs. Hammond, and I said, yeah, and he said, I'd like to talk to you.
One Monday night, a message came on my phone. Another article about the Hammonds. And immediately, this overwhelming urge came upon me to find out about the Hammonds.
I had read about them in the newspaper. We sure could see a lot of similarities between the way that they were being treated down there, not knowing them or anything about their situation, and the way we were being treated up here. And he handed me a letter.
And then that next morning, I felt this urge again, this desire to begin to write. I got on my knees and I asked the Lord and said, Lord, if you want me to write something, then please help me clear my mind and show me what I should write. The Lord was not pleased with what was happening to the Hammonds. What was happening to them, if it was not corrected, would be a type and a shadow of what would happen to the rest of the people across this country. And then once I got the letter written, I felt this desire, this urge to go to Burns and go to the Hammonds Ranch.
It was a good letter. It was a very nice, kind letter. When I got through reading it, I looked at him and I said, and who wrote the letter? Because I never had a man around my house that could write a letter like that. And he said, I did. And then I hesitated for a minute, and he says, well, I have to tell you the truth. He said, my wife got up before I left, and she changed the spelling for me, and she printed it to where you could read it.
Susie gave me a call and said, these folks were in town. Their names were Aim and Bundy, and did I remember them? Oh, yeah, the fella that had the cows on the range that the BLM was trying to get off his allotment land. And she said, yeah, those are the folks, and they've come into town to show us our support.
We were in a very similar situation. People came to our defense, and because the people came, we now are free. And she began to get hope. And then she shared them with Dwight, and he began to get a little hope that possibly the American people might be able to do something about these gross violations of their God-given rights.
Before he left, he brought in a box of apples, and I said, what time did you leave home? And he said 3:30 or something, and I said, and you picked apples before you left home to bring to my house? He said, well, I had to bring something. And he said, and I have to tell you that I didn't pick them off the tree. He said, they fell off the tree, and I just picked them off the ground and put them in a box, but they're good apples. He's just a kind, generous man.
It's like from then, it just escalated.
One of our founders, B.J. Soper, lives up in Bend. B.J. became aware of the Hammond situation because it's just a couple hours from where he lives. He drew that attention to leadership of PPN, the founders. We all traveled to Burns and sat down with the Hammond family, interviewed them, and then we went over and we sat down with Sheriff Ward. That was when I first met Ammon Bundy. Ammon and I did not see eye to eye on some of the methodology and tactics and things that he was discussing. He was a little more aggressive in his stance.
What the Bundys had wanted the Hammonds to do was to not turn themselves in. They wanted the Hammonds, they wanted the sheriff actually to protect the Hammonds and not let the federal marshals take them.
They flat out told me, either you tell the federal government these people are not going back to prison, or we're going to bring thousands of people to town and do that for you.
The Harney County Sheriff is certainly not going to go and interfere with another jurisdiction's result in a criminal case. He has no basis to do that. He has no right to do that.
You've got a lawful and binding sentence. We can't pick and choose who should serve their jail sentences and who shouldn't.
So the Hammond said, absolutely not. We are going to turn ourselves in. We are going to follow the law, and we can't have anything to do with that.
The sheriff ignores us for weeks, and basically he will not stand. So then we go to the commissioners, we say, hey, look, we need you to put an evidential hearing board together so that you can expose these corruptions that are going on and make sure that this doesn't happen so it doesn't set a precedence.
They went to the county commissioners, and I was openly smiling and kind of picking on my two county commissioners. Hey, guys, sure glad he's coming to see you and not me. Eventually, he came into this office and gave me about a 10-minute tirade on the Constitution. And I said, Mr. Bundy, thank you for your perspective, and I'd like to tell you what my perspective is on the Constitution and the one I think is correct. And he said, I'm not interested, and walked out of here.
At that point, PPN was fact-finding. We wanted to make sure what was happening in the Hammonds was factual and accurate. We wanted to have the opportunity to get the sheriff and local law enforcement perspective on it. We all left there with, okay, we'll probably have a support rally, and we scheduled, PPN scheduled a support rally for the Hammonds in December.
Hey guys, what's up? Blaine Cooper. I'm in Burns, Oregon, and we're here to support the Hammonds. Now, Joe's going to give you a little information about what's going on out here. Joe?
Basically, where we're standing right now, this is a call out, an alert to all patriots, constitutionalists, militias, and good Americans who believe in the Constitution. We are doing a patriot convoy in Burns, Oregon.
Militia groups from out of state came to show support for 2 Oregon ranchers who must go back to prison for starting fires that burned on federal land, even though they already served time for the charges.
I believe there was roughly around 400 people. They call themselves patriot groups. Idaho 3% was involved, the Central Oregon Constitutional Guard. There's an umbrella group called the Pacific Patriots.
I was concerned that these people were going to come in here and they were going to ransack downtown and tear things up.
The rally was put on very professionally. We were told right off the bat there will be no radical behavior, you know. They were going to throw pennies out on the sidewalk at the sheriff's office.
Some protesters also blame the Harney County Sheriff for not protecting the residents of the county from the federal government. They threw pennies onto the sidewalk in front of Sheriff David Ward's office.
Threw I don't know how many dollars worth of pennies at my windows and doors out here. And I read somewhere on the internet that was to signify the sheriff selling out his citizens.
Nothing that went on with the Hammonds as it relates to the arson case that they got resentenced on had anything to do with the Harney County Circuit Court or the sheriff. You got to be a special kind of dedicated to come and demonstrate in front of an empty building, because it was a Saturday, they were going to come and do this thing that had no connection with the underlying problem in January when it's, 8 degrees outside.
More than 100 carrying signs and flags.
Go ahead, yeah.
Marching in a convoy to the rancher's home to show their support.
The most humbling experience. That anybody could have.
I've been trying to get it in the news media for months. I've been writing Fox, I've been writing ABC, NBC, you name it. I tried to get online and send them notes and letters and stuff, and can you please, report on this? Can you please report on this? And then all of a sudden the Bundy show up and, oh, baby.
Dwight says it feels like a life sentence at his age.
This makes it over for me. Not very happy about that.
But then everything went crazy.
We got back to Safeway, and Ammon got up and he said, well, the fairgrounds is rented for anybody that wants to go out there, but we're going to go make a hard stand. Anybody that wants to go with us can. Anybody that doesn't want to, that's fine too. What in the hell is going on?
For those that understand that they came to make a hard stand, those that know what's going on here and have seen it for many, 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 many years, those who are ready to actually do something about it, I'm asking you to follow me and go to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And we're going to make a hard stand. Now, there are already agents on the roads that are blocked the road. And they do not want us to go out there. And we're going to go out there anyway.
People started approaching me going, hey, Emma's going out the refuge. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why? He says he's going to take it over.
We received a 911 call from somebody who had been in the vehicles with them and said, hey, a bunch of guys just jumped out, took over the refuge, and they're going through military style, clearing these rooms, and he got scared and left and reported it.
The county clerk called me and said, boy, did you hear Bundy just took over the refuge? And I thought he was kidding.
And the community at that point, which was incredibly supportive, completely 180s and turns very upset and hostile. And so we're trying to give them guidance on how they can take steps to have their voice heard in the local government. And now we've got the refuge being occupied.
Armed men took the refuge, went through clearing the buildings, and had made statements along the lines of don't fire unless fired upon. There's nothing peaceful about that.
We have taken over the refuge. We have made a hard stand. We need you to come. We need those of you who understand what is happening in this country to come and to stand.
I was 33. I was single. I had 3 children of my own at the time, and I met him at a church dance. Everyone took a partner in a circle, and as the bell rang throughout the music, then you would change partners. I thought, oh my gosh, that cute cowboy is never going to get around to me. There's quite a few couples in this circle. Lo and behold, the dance ended with him as my last partner. That was our first meeting. After that, he asked me out, and 14 days later, we were married.
Hello, everyone. This is Lloyd Finicum. It's September 2014. I'm out here on my ranch. It's great out here. The rains have come this summer. The grass is tall. It's still green. My cows are fat. Just feeling really grateful for all the blessings that I'm enjoying right now. But it doesn't take too much to see that dark storm clouds are gathering.
We started listening to the news and heard of the Bundy situation, and that's when my husband first kind of started listening and trying to understand what it was that Cliven was not agreeing with. When he heard Cliven and heard his position of states' rights, my husband asked if he could ride, and Cliven said, "Be here first thing in the morning." I was pretty worried for him. And there were a lot of agents tacked out with the full gear. They returned the cows, and they left.
Hello, everyone. This is Lloyd Finicum. I think I'm pretty upset this evening. I've been going since 5 this morning. I'm headed out, taking a load of cows out to my winter range. We'll be back sometime tonight in the dark. But I've been following what's happening over in Bend, Oregon with that ranching family over there, the Hammond family. And I'm pretty upset with what BLM has done to them. Actually, I'm really angry. They threw him in jail. They fined him a tremendous amount of fines. And now it looks like they're facing 5 more years in prison. These are real lives. These are real people. By dang, I'm angry about it.
A call came in and asked if he wanted to go up to Burns to attend the rally. He packed a backpack with an overnight set of clothes, and he left that evening. During the end part of the rally, Ammon approached them with the idea of going to Malheur.
Well, boy, I'm doing this for my kids. I have 20 grandkids, daughters and sons. I want them to be free. We'll uphold the Constitution. We'll return these resources to the people. It belongs to the people of Harney County, these good folk. And so I'll stand here with my friends.
All right, let's take you to Oregon now, where armed protesters have taken over the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
They're calling on other so-called American patriots to join them and to stand up against the government in Washington.
It just didn't make sense to me. I'd only met Ammon one time. I didn't know what he was trying to prove or could prove or why he went out there in the middle of the winter.
The militia say they're not ruling out resorting to violence either if police try to remove them from the federal premises.
I was mad. I was upset because I had heard that it was a hostile takeover of the refuge and they broke into things, and we heard all these horror stories of what was going on.
It went from a good thing to a, oh no, because now they were being kind of lawless and they were packing guns.
And I am 100% willing to lay my life down to fight against tyranny in this country.
Then I had a friend who went by the refuge and said, I don't know what everybody's talking about. There's like 8, maybe 10 dudes freezing their butts off around a campfire.
The buildings were all unlocked. The keys were there for them. There was no one there. Just said open to the public, you know, and that was it.
We kind of started realizing what was really going on, that it wasn't this big military type operation, that it was more of a sit-in, an occupation.
We plan on hurting no one. We're only restoring freedom, liberties, so that these good people can use their lands and resources again. And that is why we're here.
When we first heard the reports about armed men taking over the refuge, I think you had a certain image in your mind. When I got there, it was kind of offsetting.
There becomes a time when people are ignored to the point where they're frustrated, they don't know what else to do, they see an injustice, but all levels of government are ignoring that, and the prudent methods are not allowed to the people. And that is when the people have a right to take a hard stand.
They were having press conferences and they were all out. Most of the people that were armed were either holstered or just not showing it. It seemed that they were doing a very coordinated effort to not show their weapons, at least not in the public, or at least not in the front where they were having their press conferences.
I mean, we've stood in protest, we've waved signs, we've marched around buildings, we've done every single thing we possibly could, and it was time to do something in offense rather than just defense.
We were sitting here looking at each other going, well, what do we do now? I mean, we cannot let this set as a precedent. It wasn't like we raided down in here, we walked down in here. I didn't even have a weapon on me.
This happened like that. It happened quick. The public was not aware that we've been in town here meeting with these people, learning about the history, learning about the tyranny and the oppression that they're living under. This was a last chance, last stand situation. It's not like we just came out here and did this.
You have what are basically conservative, Christian, patriotic, flag-waving, hard-working American ranchers. Okay? These guys are not terrorists. Okay? They have a grievance. They feel pushed to such desperation that they take a desperate action like this to engage in an armed occupation. It's difficult for a fair-minded person to immediately determine who is right and who is wrong.
We've got to return the rights to the people. We cannot allow this to happen again. We encourage everybody to stand up for the Constitution peacefully. We encourage particularly, we reach out to the county commissioners. We reach out to the state legislatures. Okay? These lands belong to the state and her people. These rights belong to the people. Please uphold your oath of office and protect them.
What are these guys doing? What are they thinking? There's a time and place for everything. And I fully understand Ammon's message. I fully understand the frustration. I don't think the execution at that time and place was the appropriate time. PPN and the leadership came out and we denounced it. But we understood why he was saying it.
The media portrayal was essentially one of armed militia going crazy and taking over this federal facility.
We didn't want conflict. Nobody wants to have any bloodshed. Again, that's the media trying to stir it up with militants and all these big scary words, these words that have become scary to the public. Militia.
It's very important that each of you know this is intended to be a peaceful occupation, if so be, if you want to use those words. This is intended to be peaceful. We want all people to be safe. We want all law enforcement lives to be safe. We want our lives to be safe. The only reason that we have guns here is for our own personal protection and safety.
Right now,
The only reason that we have guns here is for our own personal protection and safety.
Right now, the threat level isn't as high or intense, so we don't walk around full kit, slung weapons everywhere. There may be a few individuals like that, but one of our #1 orders to all the men and women here, never, ever, ever fire unless fired upon. And we will stand our ground with that.
We are calling out at this time because of intel that we have received from a solid source that the FBI is indeed planning on moving on us, if you will.
I had put out a request for assistance from the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, and since it was a federal wildlife refuge and had been taken, I requested that the FBI handle that investigation.
We are preparing to defend ourselves, preparing to defend the people of Harney County, and we are preparing to expose this corruption that has been going on for years, and it needs to end here. Thank you.
When I grew up, I never got out alive. I never spoke out of turn. I was one of those kids when I walked from in class in Sunday school when I was a little kid, all the other kids were rowdy, and I always folded my arms and tried to get. It came naturally to be in line. And so this is very out of character for me because I've always tried to follow the rules. And do you know I don't have a speeding ticket today? I do have one warning. This choice is solely mine. Nobody asked me to do this. Bundy's didn't ask me to do this. They didn't stop me. They respected my choice. But this choice, this decision is mine and mine alone, and I will live with it. And I'll bear the consequences, whatever they may be.
I was stunned at the escalation of FBI presence. They had turned the county courthouse into a fortress. They had ringed it with chain link cyclone fencing. They had put in jersey barriers for ramming. Those guys were kitted up for warfare with more kit than I had seen in Afghanistan.
The amount of escalation and force that they were willing to use for a handful of protesters was very shocking. We were 35 miles away from the town. Nobody ever threatened anybody. I don't understand where the level of fear came from.
They shut the BLM down. They shut the Forest Service down. They shut the schools down. There wasn't a gun at the refuge that would shoot 30 miles.
We in this land, we grow up clinking tin cans with 22s, hunting jackrabbits, and the first thing we're taught is what? Do not point guns at people. And so I have never in my life pointed a gun at a person, and I never intend to. They should never point a gun at me, and I shall not point a gun back, and we shall leave it at that. But I will live under a clear sky till the day I die.
Worst case scenario, they come down and kill us all. I don't think they want to do that because they still lose. The American people across from ocean to ocean will retaliate, and their power will be taken away from them.
We know that what we're doing is right. We know that this is constitutional, and we know that we're trying to improve this country.
I know what our government can do, and I didn't want these people to get hurt. I'm just out here to keep people safe, make sure there's no shots going off. If the FBI did come, they would come dark with night vision. They've got helicopters, MRAPs, all that fancy technology. They've got unlimited resources, and we're just a bunch of guys out here with rifles that we bought a couple of years ago. There's some guys out here with rifles from World War II. They're ready too. They've only got 5 shots, but they're ready. I have a feeling if the FBI did come here, that nobody would be leaving alive.
With the escalation of FBI presence, it became very concerning that they were going to try and go after these guys violently. There was a discussion as what do we do, and so the decision was made that PPN would take a neutral position. We would not endorse, support, or other, but it became Ammon, You guys stay on the refuge. Government, FBI guys, you stay on your side of the line. Keep the separation here. You two have issues you want to discuss and work out. Your civil disobedience, drawing attention to land use. They can do that. Keep your distance.
We have every constitutional right to be doing what we're doing, because it very clearly states in the Constitution that the federal government does not have the right, does not have the authority from the people to come down into the states and to control its land and resources. If they are to control land and resources in the state, then it has to be properly ceded to the federal government. And the way that's done is outlined in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17.
Under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, Congress will have authority with the consent of the legislature over forts, arsenals, dockyards, magazines, and other needful buildings. That's all they can have as far as places in the state of Oregon. This whole reserve here is unconstitutional, and the states have to, well, of course, right now the militias are stepping up to take this land back from the federal government and giving it to the states.
There is a federal central power called the federal government that says that they own and control 1/3 of the landmass of this country. Now, they have complete legislative power. A man just sitting behind a desk can write a statute that has the force and effect of law. If I or the rancher gets contrary with that, there is a ranger, a BLM ranger, that is armed with a gun that enforces that statute. If you get contrary more, you're hauled before a federal court. Now, neither the bureaucrat is elected nor accountable to me, and the ranger is not elected nor accountable to us, the people, and the judges aren't. All three branches of power are combined into one without representation. So this is a serious issue to freedom.
Everything that we live in, the cars we drive, the clothes we wear, everything comes from the earth. When those resources are restricted or controlled to the point where people can't access them, they can't use them, they can't benefit from them, then what it does is it puts people into poverty. A perfect example of that is Harney County. At one time, Harney County was the wealthiest county in the state, and now it's the poorest county in the state. And it is directly connected with the federal government coming in and controlling its land and resources.
Well, these are the best of times to come on down to Hines.
In the 20s, Edward Hines Lumber Company had a 50-year contract for cutting timber here. This town was amazingly wealthy. The mill was operating lots of lumber. We were #1 in the state for per capita income for at least 1 year in the 70s.
Tonight we look at a battle that's raging in the United States over an endangered bird. The northern spotted owl is said to be on the verge of extinction. Logging in the Pacific Northwest has almost eradicated its habitat.
Biologists believe this bird must have the large trees of the ancient forest to survive. There are only 3,000 pairs left, and they say if it goes, it means the entire ecosystem and all who live in it are at risk.
The environmental industry got their act together, put the focus on the spotted owl, and undermined the timber economy. Within 6 months, we lost 1,000 jobs in this town, in a county that had around 8,000 population. It was absolutely devastating.
Well, we're in a tower. These towers are actually used to detect fires from long distances, and we use it for observation in case the feds decide to roll in here and kill us. It was kind of scary for the first couple of days, because we thought that, as we've seen throughout history, Ruby Ridge and Waco, Ruby Ridge, I mean, the FBI and ATF came in and they shot a pregnant lady, a pregnant woman who was unarmed. So they've been known to come in and kill people. It originally started off with the Hammonds, but I've been fighting the BLM for years now. I was at the Bundy Ranch standoff. The BLM's original role were land janitors. Now they're armed with SWAT teams and attack helicopters and weapons of war. Why would they need that? They're just supposed to be land janitors. And it should not constitutionally exist. The goal of this occupation is, one, to get clemency for the Hammonds. We'd like them out of prison. And also we'd like to see the control of these lands go back to their rightful owners and just give back into the hands of the people of Harney County. They are oppressed in the highest order. They're so afraid to speak out because if they speak out, they're afraid that the BLM and other entities are going to steal their grazing permits and everything else, which is actually a grazing right.
We have a situation in this county where the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, have teamed up and taken hundreds of thousands of acres away from the people. It has brought wealth and power to these government officials and put the people in duress and put them in poverty. It is acts like this that expose the true problem.
So this argument evolved into, we're going to take this and we're going to give it back to the ranchers. You can't set the precedence that it's okay to just go take something over and say, we're going to decide who this goes to.
The Constitution of the United States does not allow the federal government to own land. This land will go back to the people of Harney County, and they will be able to use the land and resources for their benefit.
BLM and other entities are going to steal their grazing permits.
Will tell you the federal government can only own small things like forts and docks and all kinds of military things. The Constitution does say that. It's talking about a part of the Constitution that was making provision for a new capital for the United States, and the provision was that they could pay whatever states they took the land from, no more than 10 square miles, and that they would make provisions for the docks and the magazines for ammunition and other military forts. Well, that was to defend the nation's capital, which had not yet been established, and that was just something in the Constitution to make provision that it could be created. They were just talking about what's now Washington, D.C. That's it.
Yeah, the donations are coming from all over the United States. A lot of them have come straight from the ranchers that live in the town. They appreciate everything we're doing. And it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm doing something for a good cause. I'm a terrorist. Obviously, we are all terrorists here. And anybody that comes on this property is a terrorist. And the media coming in here, I don't really want to talk to them anymore because they're going out and telling everybody that we're not doing the right thing. And we are doing the right thing. You know, we all have families. We have children. We have jobs. We stepped away from that life to come over here and do some good for our community.
These people deserve better than this. Our government should know better than this. They have no feelings, no compassion for anybody in this country at all anymore. They're not representing us whatsoever. My reason for being out here with a straw both the camel's back was the fact that the media trying to make it play out that the Hammonds were, are some kind of domestic terrorist. I mean, this is a 74-year-old man. He knows he goes to prison for another 4 years. He ain't coming back out to see his family again. Over 139 acres that burn up.
Us patriots go through such bullshit. The American public has no idea.
We're pro-Constitution. The Constitution of the United States. We are pro-government. We're not anti-government. We are against people that are in power, that abuse their power in government, that do not follow the Constitution.
It doesn't matter how many there are that are for us or how many there are against us. Even if there's just one person that's being terrorized or forced to live in oppression, then we need to step in and we need to help lift them up and build them up. It's one of our founding father quotes that says, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting the brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And that's what we're facing right now.
What they did as a protest to occupy a place where they had no right to be, it was an attempt to protect liberty the way they saw it. The way they saw it happened to be not according to the law and not even according to history. The only solution if you don't like the law is to change the law. You have two choices. One of them is through the democratic process, and the other one is through revolution. When you've got an army bigger and better than the United States, let me know.
Federal government, go home. Take care of federal things.
secure our border, protect our nations, keep commerce regular, and just a couple other things. Get the heck out of Dodge and leave the rest for the state and the counties to take care of. Let the people be free. It's high time, dadgummit. Get out of town.
You cannot go to war against the federal government. This is not 240 years ago. There is no group of armed militiamen that can go up against the awesome power of the federal government. It ain't going to happen.
Best case scenario is that the people of the county stand and take claim of their own rights, meaning they stop paying the federal government to manage their rights. They stop entering into contracts that take their constitutional rights away. Once that is done and recognized, we want to see the Hammonds freed.
Dwight Hammond's same age as my father. My father's pretty healthy still. He can saddle up his horse and ride with me. He helps me when I need some help. You know, how many more years when you're 75 are you going to be able to continue to get out there and chase those cows at a full run? You know, I'm so grateful for those few years that I still have with my father. Where's Dwight? Where's Dwight Hammond? Where is he spending those 5 years, dadgummit? If we don't get him out of prison, that's why I am sitting here on this place. Call me an occupier, call me a terrorist, call me a dadgum ignorant redneck. I don't care. I am here for Dwight Hammond and his family, and they had better get out of that prison. They need to be pardoned. Mr. Obama, you and I don't see eye to eye on probably anything, but I am appealing to your humanity, Mr. President Obama, to pardon them. That is unjust. Let them go home to their families. Let them go home to the families. I want to get the heck out of Dodge. I want to go back home to Arizona. I don't want to be here on this place, but I am here because of the actions of this federal government. And by dang, if you want to give me a warrant to come after me with the FBI, so be it. I don't care, but you better well let those Hammond families out of prison, because things are starting to heat up, and I don't think you guys actually even really care.
There was no communication. Ammon wasn't talking to the county wasn't talking to Ammon, and so that became a concern. Is you're sitting on the refuge, you're sitting in the courthouse, and the FBI is sitting in the schoolhouse, and they all are not communicating or talking to each other. So we arranged for Ammon and Sheriff Ward to meet on that road, have a discussion, and Sheriff Ward offered, I'll drive you to the county line. And we're like, that's it?
Standing side by side, Sheriff Dave Ward and protest leader Ammon Bundy talked about ending the armed takeover of the wildlife refuge. A Bundy associate wanted to talk about land rights and grievances.
I'm not here to talk about all that. I'm here to talk about offering you guys the opportunity to leave the county peacefully, get back to your families.
We pose no threat to the community whatsoever at all. It's time to get the schools open, let your community get back to living. We do not pose a threat.
And that's what I'm asking for.
But that can be done without us leaving.
At the time that I offered them the opportunity to leave and to escort them out of the state, there was a lot of different components, things going on behind the scenes there. The federal side of the House was more on board with, resolving the situation. So no charges had been filed federally, rather than charging these people locally and keeping them here. If we could resolve the situation by getting them to leave and go home and let them work it out through the legal system, yeah, I'm sure there was going to be some consequences, but nowhere near the level of consequences that they face after a 41-day standoff.
I want to help you guys get out of here. I'll get you a safe escort out.
We're getting ignored again, Sheriff. Sir,
I didn't come to argue. I just came to
Not
offer you
either.
guys peaceful resolution.
Okay.
So
I appreciate it.
Once they rejected that offer and said, we're staying here, I knew that they were going to force us to deal with them. Giving in to an armed criminal takeover, but it's just not going to work. There came a point where people had to be taken into custody.
Lavoy and everybody, we're going into the next county to talk about the Constitution and how they could take their grazing rights back. They've been free to pass from the refuge and into town.
We were getting things prepared, and we had a cute family there that had arrived a few days earlier, the Sharp family. They were there to sing, and they had decided they were going to go with them to this meeting and put on one of their concerts because it just touches your heart itself. They're just awesome.
I heard about this protest that was happening in Oregon involving the Bundy family, and I knew the Bundy family from the 2014 standoff, so I called Ryan and I was like, what's going on up there in Oregon? He told me what they were doing and why they were protesting, and my mom and I talked about it, and she decided she was going. We were a singing family, and that was a big part of our lives, especially when we went to the Bundy Ranch. Our biggest reason for going there was to sing to everybody, and when we went to Oregon, my mom's purpose for bringing the children there was to sing to the people and sing to the FBI and just try to bring some peace and bring some happiness to a situation that was a little bit scary.
Each vehicle would leave, for safety reasons, 10 to 15-minute intervals, so they wouldn't be close together. The family had left, and the oldest daughter, who had just arrived the day before, wasn't ready.
I was supposed to be leaving with my family, and I was not ready to go, so I stayed behind, and I was going to leave with the next group that was leaving at 3:30, which would be the Bundys and Lavoy Finicum. We left in Lavoy's truck. It was about a 2-hour drive for us.
The Jeep behind us was supposed to be coming 10 to 15 minutes behind us. They came directly behind us, and for them to be right on our tail was really not what was supposed to happen. Then Lavoy up in the front noticed this bunch of vehicles, and there was an angled road there. There was a whole bunch of these SUVs and vehicles lined up.
What is that? What's going on? And I turned around and I could see all these vehicles that were coming up.
All of a sudden it was like a wake-up call. We've been set up.
So we just saw vehicles coming up behind us. We could hear their sirens and see their lights, and we could see them pull the Jeep over.
The boy kept saying, we got to get to the sheriff, we got to get to the sheriff. And that's in Grant County. We knew that he would protect us.
They started shouting to turn the vehicle off and put your hands out the window, and Lavoy didn't turn the vehicle off, but he put his hands out the window and his head, and he said, are you police? He said, we're going to the next county to talk to the sheriff.
I'm going to meet the sheriff. The sheriff is waiting for us. So you do as you damn well please. But I'm not going anywhere. Here I am, right there. Right there, put a bullet through it. You understand? I'm going to go meet the sheriff. You back down or you kill me now. Go ahead, put the bullet through me.
I can see on top of his hat is a red laser. I'm worried that they're gonna shoot him.
All right, send the woman out now. Look for it. Well, I'm going to ask her if they want to go out. Look for it.
I was like, okay, I'm not getting out of the vehicle. I was afraid that I'd be shot if I moved too fast or if anybody did anything.
Victoria says I'm not getting out. Then I'm not getting out either.
I'm not turning over. I'm going into Dade County. I'm going into Grant County and see the sheriff.
Well, if we duck and you drive, what are they going to do? Try to knock us out? How much further we got to go?
We got about 50 miles.
You should never have stopped.
I'm going to keep going.
Then we have to duck.
I know.
What are they going to do with Ryan?
Okay.
If we take off, are they going to back? Shoot your tires out?
Most likely.
Hey, Ryan Hammond.
Why did they pull you over? There's no service here.
Just because.
Are you ready?
Well, where's the guns?
You got to stop. You can't get around it. I'm going to go. You guys ready?
Get down.
And you duck now. Give me that camera. Okay, give me this camera. Go. Then I looked out and I could see one vehicle behind us pursuing.
What about Allen and those guys? We can't get around him. I'm going to go get help. Okay.
And then all of a sudden, he said something about a roadblock.
Yeah. Hang on. Okay, no shooting. Hang on. Okay, one here. Go ahead, shoot me.
Stay down, stay down, stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Damn it. Are they shooting him? Did they shoot him? You asshole. Oh my God!
I just hear a bunch of shots all at once, and he fell. I started shouting that I was an EMT. I was trying to get up, trying to get out.
Is he dead? Bump it out. I am dead! Stop it.
Are you dead?
No, I am dead! Hold on. Hey, no shooting. Don't answer. Where the hell is the boy? Down.
I can't see.
Shut up. Stay down, Mike. Oh, God! Stay down. Stay down. Yes.
They didn't want us to get out, whoever was shooting at us. Then, the next thing we knew, this blue smoke stuff started coming from the front seats towards us, and it hit my nose, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was choking.
I'm taking some. Keep going, bro. Shit. Stop! Please! Stop! That's ridiculous. Those are stupid. I can kill all of us. Water, please. Protect. Look at that. God. Please keep your name. They got lasers still on us.
They got lasers still on us. The boy got out. I think they killed the boy. They just shot gas rounds into the car. We're hunkered down in here trying not to
Right then, I think was the scariest moment for me because I thought that we were all going to die. I thought about my family, and I thought about the things that mattered in life to me, and I just thought we were all going to die.
Location.
I'm dying! Is it better? Okay, let's get up. Okay! That's you, Ryan. I don't know if you can get up. You get up first. Let her in first. Let her out first. You go first.
I started shouting, "We surrender, we surrender." And I finally heard someone shout back, "Send out the mail first." So Ryan got out, and while I was standing there, they said, "Stay right there, stay with your hands where we can see them." And I could see the boy laying in the snow, and I could just tell that he was dead. I could see men in camouflage and in black standing between the trees. And it seemed like so many of them.
They yell at me to come, and I'm getting out of the car with their hands up, of course. They're all dressed in military gear or whatever, these green outfits, and they're like snipers. They have all these long guns, all these guns. They have all these rifles. Victoria and I were yelling at the men, "You guys are all part of murder. You just murdered a man in cold blood." She says, "I almost died today." And I said, "Yeah, Victoria, you're 18 years old. And you're going to remember this moment for the rest of your life."
I don't know. A lot of people tell me that I shouldn't have been through that at that age. Tuesday morning, I called him to talk to him about what I was going to be doing that day. He said he was really busy, that he had interviews lined up with John. And that was the last time I talked to him. I had gone into Fredonia with my daughter for her game about 1:30, and his parents were there, and his brother was there, and my son was there, and we were all there. All of a sudden, somebody came up to me and said, "There's been something that's happened
and she was hysterical. And she was screaming and crying that the boy had been killed. And it was just unreal. It was not real. Somebody had gone into the gym and told the officials what was going on, and they stopped the game, and they brought my family into the hallway, and we and told them what was going on, and they gave us privacy for a while until we could get ourselves together enough to go over to the local police station and try to get more information and confirmation, and because we were still holding out hope that it wasn't Lavoy, and that was a nightmare in itself, just going over there and making those phone calls to people who were just heartless on the other end and would just push forward or the hold button or transfer me to another agency or transfer me multiple different times and then just put me on an answering machine without answering and whether or not it was Lavoy. I thought, how could people be so unkind? But and then that town had been through so much with the different groups that had come into their town and the FBI and the Sheriff's Department escalating fear, that they were just probably glad that it was over. To leave the vehicle as quick as he did in Shauna's video just confirms that he was indeed trying to move the threat away from those in the truck. The 18-year-old Victoria Sharp is the same age as our daughter, our youngest daughter, and I know he was worried for Ryan and Shauna as well. Those people were victims and were being shot at multiple times without ever exhibiting any threat to any of those officers. And I believe that he was murdered.
I can't imagine anything that could be bad enough that would be made better by the death of a man like Lavoy Finicum. But then I hear my husband tell me that he's scared to death in prison. And so I don't know everything.
He was shot in the back without a gun in his hand. Whether he was reaching for one or not, he never pulled a gun out of his hand.
I think they expected to shoot someone that day. I mean, they shot at the vehicle before he got out. They shot at all of us, really. Then he got out and he definitely drew their attention away from us.
His whole conviction was to protect us. And I know that he was running away from the vehicle so that he would draw the fire and they wouldn't fire upon us.
I don't think that he was murdered. Lavoy reached toward his pocket, if I remember correctly, at least 3 times.
I had an investigation done and an autopsy done myself. I picked up his body. I took it to the medical examiner, so I know that he was shot in the back 3 times. And I know that those exit wounds came and exited on the left side, and that is where he is reaching each time. But his hands go back up in the air multiple times as he reaches for a shot. He goes back up and his hand is empty again. He did not go for a weapon, or he would have had the weapon in his hand.
It's really hard to separate all the factors that led to a tragic death. At the end of the day, Lavoy Finicum was the one who had the last best opportunity to prevent violence. Had he complied with the orders of the officers, like everyone else in that vehicle, he would be alive today.
And unfortunately, there was life lost through the course of this. But I still believe that they found the most peaceful resolution they could.
I had asked these folks to go home. It's been said many times, you could have taken them into custody here or here or here. There were a lot of opportunities, yes, but no safe opportunities to take somebody into custody after statements had been made that they weren't willing to be taken into custody. If there was a failure somewhere in trying to resolve this, it would be that loss of life.
When you look at it, it's tough. You're watching, in my opinion, the assassination of an American. I walked that site. Having military background, I know what an L ambush is. They had put their vehicles in a blocking position, and they had set up along one side of it, the high ground. They had actually cut the tree branches so they're about 4 to 6 inches to use as rifle rests. If you went 150 feet past that corner, there was a 3/4 mile straightaway. It had sloping sides and was snow covered. You could have spike stripped it, let him drive down, his tires would have flattened, and he had no place to go. I understand there are criminals, but an American that wants to take care of his family, has Christian values, has strong integrity and morals, is shot with his hands up because the FBI team lead amped up his people that he was an enemy. Something's seriously fucking wrong in this country.
After Mr. Finicum lost his life, we were able to get a blockade. What that is just one more armed element you have to go through. Usually, as in most military operations, when the leadership's gone, the rest of the thing falls apart. Proved to be true. Over the next, 24, 48 hours, everybody scattered to the wind, with the exception of the 4 that were left at the end. And I never did understand what their point was.
David Fry, Jeff Banta, and Sean and Sandy Anderson are the last 4 remaining at the refuge, 40 days after armed protesters took it over.
The FBI, local and state police cleared out after a standoff at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge came to an end. About 9:40 this morning, 3 occupiers surrendered to police and were taken into custody. A 4th, the final protester, refused to leave, but supporters, including evangelist Franklin Lamb and a Nevada lawmaker, convinced him to surrender, and he did, after a simple request.
He ate a cookie, asked everyone to say hallelujah. When they said hallelujah, he came out.
You know, they say that there was an armed standoff in Harney County. That is a total bullshit lie. There were people that were exercising their Second Amendment rights. There were people that were on guard, but none of those people ever pointed their guns at anybody.
I miss him. I miss him a great deal. I'm learning to do everything that he used to do. When you are a married couple, you're a team, and you each have your own little areas of responsibility, and you count on each other. Was I angry at the Bundys? Oh no. I've only caught myself being angry a couple of times, and I've quickly brought that into check. I know that what he did, he believed in, and I see him as a hero, not a martyr. I forgive those who have killed him.
I usually get a call every night or every other night, mostly just for him to know that I'm okay. And he tells me that he doesn't feel safe.
What's left? They've given up their right to appeal. So the only thing left is to ask for the president for executive clemency, to actually look at the case and see whether he thinks it's fair and whether he thinks what they did deserves 5 years in prison, and asking for mercy.
I keep hoping that there's some commutation or clemency or pardon or something, that there's somebody out there somewhere that can understand what a travesty our federal government is.
These were my brothers, my friends. They're locked up, and one of them's dead.
If Bundy had had his act together, he wouldn't have allowed the militia anywhere close to him. He'd have done an occupation for a period of time and left, and today the law would be on trial. The regulation, all that stuff would be on trial, as opposed to him being on trial.
What's happening to these cultures? They're being murdered.
Ranchers are worried about coming up. They don't want to become the target of the bureaucrats.
Martin Luther King got it right. He did peaceful demonstrations, sit-ins, walked across bridges. Bundy did it with firearms.
I want to make something clear here. We will see other standoffs. The overall majority of this movement is peaceful, but there are extremely dangerous threads which, when the time comes, will yield towards confrontation as opposed to reason.
Pretty tough to feel American when your own government has a vendetta against you. Yes, I still love this country. And I wish we could fix it.